Hi, thank you. And I'd like to just say thank you to our panel members for such a diverse discussion today. And on this panel especially, I think we've seen a range of ideas coming through from several different angles, and they've all been fascinating. But some of the overriding themes that seem to be recurring time and time again are the significant changes that we're all perceiving to be happening right now in Perth. So I want to focus on audience questions, so I'd like to open that up for the discussion of the wide-ranging topics that we've had here. So can I hand over to the audience, please, for questions for the panel?
Me?
Yeah.
I can just yell.
Okay. We've got 2 microphones coming your way. Just
when you were talking about galleries earlier, I thought, you were talking about the Kerry Stokes collection, and yeah, and I thought, gosh, Western Australia is so unique because we have this capital city down in the south, and we have this amazing countryside that is really breathtaking and relatively uncorrupted by huge cities throughout, like on the east coast. And I thought, why aren't we pushing for a Guggenheim to come here? Because we've got this spectacular river, we've got beautiful oceans in the city of Perth, and perhaps it's a spot that could be attractive. When you think of Bilbao in Spain, which was an industrial city, what do you people think about something like that? Because the more art we have, the more diversity we're going to have, and the more stimulating art scene, I should think.
Can I direct that to Duncan, please? Talking about cultural infrastructure there, perhaps we'll start with Duncan.
I mean, look, there's been a really interesting period of time where we've been reimagining the city. We've all had to live with the congestion. But Elizabeth Quay and the uniting of Northbridge and the city and the work that's been going on in the east end of the city, obviously new football stadium and the various connects, and profoundly changing the nature of our capital. And you would have seen the articles in the Sunday Times where they talked about, Committee for Perth and the general discussion around Perth growing up. And I think, from my perspective, a lot of the cultural infrastructure we've got now was provided at the end of that mining boom that Sever talked about earlier, with Charlie Court committed, particularly his government, to a whole lot of things, the Concert Hall of His Majesty's, the Cultural Centre, all, and the creation of the Academy of Performing Arts, were all things done in one 4-year period of government. Almost unimaginable today. You get those kind of things, plus regional art centres and so on, all committed at the same time. That was all built for a city of, less than 1 million people. We're now heading towards 3 million people, which I think at the time when that was provided, Melbourne was about 3 or 3.5. And we all looked over there and went, oh my God, it's such a big place, and look what they've got. We actually now are at the point where we have to imagine that and imagine how the city will work, where it fits in the region. It is obviously a major capital within the Indian Ocean Asian region, and it should have a strong cultural identity, I think, related to its net economic impact on Australia and the region. And yes, of course, we should look to engage people with, at a visual arts level, with the landscape and what the city represents to the rest of the state. So I think it doesn't take much imagination to imagine what cultural infrastructure we should be developing alongside 5 new hotels and various other things. The issue, as we all recognise, is that we've probably gone past the point where the state can build it all as they imagined, in the 60s, 70s, post-war period. Cultural infrastructure was done by the state. I think now cultural infrastructure in the future will be delivered, much more broadly by the development industry and others who see the value of arts within the mix of the life of a city where people live, people shop, people have businesses and so on. And really that's probably the great challenge, is we've got all the the underlying capacities, our universities, our corporate collections and so on, and how do we liberate those and, as you say, create something that would attract people to come here. The river is a great connect, and logically we've got ideas around Sunset Hospital site being potentially, I've heard sculpture parks and all sorts of things there. There's interest there. We've got Elizabeth Quay and opportunities there, particularly with significant public art investment. You've got the East Perth Powerhouse as a potential site, which I know there's strong interest in potentially it being used for cultural infrastructure, the new museum and potentially the art gallery being further developed and so on. I think that broad range of infrastructure already provides for the opportunity. University of WA's got a great art gallery now, and the Burnt Collection proposal would really make this part another connect. So you almost got an art trail starting to develop. The question is, can we get the imagination right to sort of lay this out so the public can get engaged and enthused and involved? Because I think that's the problem. It is a lack of audience and a lack of connect publicly around discourse on the arts and its importance to our society at the moment. We need to ramp up. And I am grateful for my media colleagues, and particularly the print media, Stephen and Vicky and stuff, that they are actually pushing this. They're actually trying to get the argument out there. It'd be nice if they're a bit kinder to us, but that's all good, because important people start responding to these big issues, and that we get the public's finally views out there around what they would like to see for this city. I personally would think if on my watch we lost the Stokes collection to Western Australia, because you think other people aren't bidding for it, well of course they will, would be a tragedy to this state, just a tragedy. So it goes beyond just your responsibilities as a public servant dealing with what money the government gives you. You have to provide a strong, leadership in this to try to say, no, this is important, we've got to fight for it, we've got to try to keep this.
Okay, can I just step in there? And one of the consistent themes that's been recurring today is that idea of having to change the model, change the way we're doing things and engage a new audience. Is there a way that we can address this idea? Merrick over here, thanks. Thanks, Merrick.
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to ask Sever a question. I should declare an interest. I'm one of the members of the New Art Collective WA, so obviously I have some sympathy for the model that Felicity was talking about. But one of the models that you were proposing was the artists that found a way to engage the expensive baggage companies to make an income. While I think that's entrepreneurship is worthwhile, aren't we entering into the murky waters of market-led visual arts culture as opposed to what Felicity is proposing, where the artist gets to do what they want to do?
I didn't mean... Are you on? I didn't mean to imply that there was any compromise in the work that they were doing. It was completely uncompromised, but there was an opportunity. So I suppose it's a little like selling to a corporate collection in a way. They were selling their art, and it was obviously being used in a way that it was intended. It was fabric, and it was made to order, and it was a commission. So I'm sorry if I implied otherwise there. Obviously, any individual artist can consider any opportunity. The amount of compromise is up to them. But there was no lack of integrity whatsoever in the project. It was just that they sought a market for their work at a scale that enabled them to stay in business rather than as individuals attempting to sell a metre of fabric here and there.
And I think a point of the discussion is that idea of diversification of practice. And I think Jenny Behan's got a comment for this one.
I'd just like to say that I spent 6 months in the Tourism Commission quite some time ago developing a cultural tourism strategy. But if we were the tourism industry, we wouldn't be sitting here wondering if it was this and wondering if it was that. We would have had a very hard-hitting research project going. surveying all those former arts attendees at galleries, the gallery directors, probably well prior to them hanging up their boots. But it's not too late to gather that information and to look at what the other markets might be. Mm-hmm. The other thing is, in terms of getting more focus on West Australian culture and art, the tourism commissions at both state and national level invest heavily in bringing journalists to the experience. They don't expect you to discover the great food in Margaret River. They look across the world to see who the great food editors are, and they lure them here with money. They pay them. They have one person at least, or two people, who work full-time within the Department of Tourism Commission in our case, I think still, who just devise the itineraries and the experiences that those people will enjoy while they're in the state. The contra is that they go away and write for their readership, which you couldn't in a fit obtain with your monogram or your whatever. I'm not saying there isn't an important role for monograms, there is, but it is a different way of thinking about how you underpin the experience, the cultural experience. I don't want to call it a commodity, because I think it is much more than that.
And I think, Jenny, yours is...
It's a challenge, Duncan, to you.
Sorry?
With your friends in tourism.
So this is more of a statement or a suggestion than a question, and I think part of the surrounding issues around these ideas is a matter of terminology. And there is another question just in the middle audience here, a gentleman, but if anyone would like to take that idea up of the terminology, how we look at what it is that we're producing and how we can describe it, how we talk about it actually impact on how it's understood, how it's represented. Can I have that point perhaps from Felicity? That idea of, so if it's a business, if it's a market that we're looking for, is that an important difference in the creation of art to the models that we're accustomed to?
Not to the creation of the art, but certainly how you market it. But to a certain extent, that is the job of the arts writer or the arts administrator or the dealer or the curator, is to present the work to your audience, depending on whichever audiences that you've chosen to present the work. I mean, I think there is a concern locally and nationally with artists about the, I've always worked in the art market, so, I'm fully support artists being involved in the market, because I think that's, it's how a lot of money comes into it, it's how people get supported.
Sure.
But I find it quite disturbing, and I know the artists do, there's new sort of KPMIs talk about assets and, artists, you're taking the creativity out of it and you're talking about art and as how valuable it is in a monetary value, or as a client, the Australia Council's, artists perhaps are their clients. And I think there is a danger in the terminology.
Absolutely, and we see that terminology cropping up in a number of different contexts. But I'd like to hand over to the next question, please.
Yeah, I've found it very frustrating in this arena. We have a large audience, although it's a fair chunk of it left at lunchtime. Really, we've got a resource here, and the days of interaction now, we're so used to interacting with people and our audience as artists. And how many people here have bought art in the last 3 years? Hands up? Okay. Now, why don't you ask them? Similarly, the discussion this morning was, about how to get artists, West Australian artists, to get out of West Australia and exhibit and raise their profile interstate or overseas. How many artists here have exhibited interstate in the last 2 years? Okay. How many people have exhibited overseas in the last, say, 2 years? There's your answers. Otherwise, we're speculating. Thank you.
Would somebody like to respond to these ideas?
I mean, I think you're right. Absolutely. that...
Oh, sorry.
I exhibited in, had a solo show in Singapore earlier on this year, and one of the things that people keep talking about is the expense, hopping in your car and driving to Melbourne, or hopping on the plane, flying to Singapore without any funding from the government. You have to do it on your own, and you have to figure out the show so it's really cheap to take on the plane. We had a family holiday in Singapore, and all my kids took a piece of artwork under their arm. I stuffed my sculpture into a suitcase, and miraculously it was improved, I thought, when I pulled it out. I didn't sell many artworks, but unfortunately I got a really good commission from a hotel in Singapore. But I think it's one of those things, if we're not going to get the money from the government, if we don't have any big patrons like friends of mine used to have in Melbourne, like Hank Eaves, he bought my friend an electric printing press, and she was able to produce beautiful prints and exhibit in New York. We don't really have that anymore. There's no sort of those gold mines of patrons that I don't think they're around. I think they're overseas themselves, or down the beach.
I do think
you have to do something. You have to figure it out and be creative and go for it, because it was a really great experience. It was fantastic to go to Asia, and I highly recommend it. It's a really interesting, engaging artistic community, and they were really happy to have me there. So go for it.
So, but we still are talking about changing models, and I wonder if there are any points that anyone wants to bring up about the changing kind of demographic that we have, the changing commercial environment that we have. How do we adjust to fit into that? How do we innovate to accommodate that? And there's a question just there, lady in black and white.
Hi, I'm Di Taylor. I'm a practicing artist and completely independent of any funding. I noticed in the industry for the last 30, 40 years that I've been practicing, it used to be where galleries promoted the artist and the branding, and the model, I think, is failing, because now the brand image, such as Apple and iPod and everything else, is about branding. And the galleries and the curators don't brand the artists anymore, they brand themselves and the galleries. And that's what they promote. And they only want that name to be known. So no artist in their history has no longevity. Nobody's taking the artist and creating them, and even people like Robert Juniper, in his late senior years on his deathbed, had to get all of his art back from around Australia, and instead of the galleries looking after him, his wife sold from his front door. So something in this industry is not working, and it's the branding and the money behind the branding that is driving the industry into the wrong direction. And I'd like to see the model change so that the model has to look after the senior artists in the industry. I'd like to know how you think you can do that.
Can I answer that?
Sure.
I kind of find some of those ideas quite offensive. I've spent 20 years working in galleries in the commercial art scene. I run my own gallery. I know Seva, I know most of the dealers in Perth. They're not making a living. They're losing money. They devote their time to their artists. And most of the artists that I've ever dealt with have give back. You know, it's a relationship. It is a personal relationship that the dealer or the gallery has with its artists, and it has to work both ways. And when it's successful, it is because it's working both ways. I don't think that the traditional... I don't think it's about dealers or galleries or money, screwing the artists down. That's not what it's about. What we should be thinking about is how we can all work together, the Indigenous art world, the Asian art world, the local scene, the national scene, how we can all collaborate for our artists.
Can I just bring Sandy in just to comment on that other aspect of inclusiveness in the arts from the Australia Council's point of view, and then we have a couple of questions up the back. Thank you.
And you're talking about, I'm looking at that question above.
Yeah.
Look, I'm not privy to the kind of executive decisions about the budget and if there are going to be interventions of whether, how it's going to be evenly spread, but the focus of the grants program is funding excellent art and ideas. So from wherever it comes from. So it's not saying that there needs to be a quota from WA and there needs to be a quota from South Australia. It's really kind of going out there and saying, if you need information, if you need help, if you need some kind of guidance, we can provide it for you.
And the model is a demonstrably equitable one.
I definitely. And
you're hoping.
Yeah. But well, the success rates are really low of Western Australian artists receiving grants, but the application rates are really low. So really, the application process is a numbers game. The more people apply, the bigger the probability of the success rate. And so,
sure.
There are the stats to prove it.
Yeah. And there were a couple of questions just quickly, because I have been told we've only got 2 more minutes left. Right up the back, is it?
Hi. I just wanted to touch briefly on the logistics of getting the work overseas, interstate, and the idea of getting your children to carry their work on an aeroplane. About 6 or 7 years ago, Qantas changed their baggage allowance rules from a certain number of items to a weight limit. And very quickly the sporting industry went, we're going to make a deal. And their teams sorted out, we get excess baggage without paying more money, we're going to make a deal with Qantas. It took the music industry about 3 or 4 more years to work this out. In that short period of time, musicians in Western Australia found it very hard to tour, particularly to the East Coast. They could not take their equipment with them. They were hiring equipment over there, and it was detrimental to touring in bands in Western Australia for a number of years. APRA made a deal with Qantas. Now, members of APRA have an increased baggage limit allowance. NAVA should be stepping in and making a similar arrangement for their members, for their visual artists, to get their artworks on flights when they're touring to shows. The music industry's worked it out. They're a part of the arts. I think that the visual artists need to get on board and start doing these sorts of things in order to increase national and international focus. Just very quickly, I also wanted to touch on education. At some point, many speakers today have spoken about education, but I notice from a government perspective, it seems to be about educating and supporting artists and growing artists, but from an institution and gallery and art collective perspective, it's from educating an audience. And I think in schooling, we need to not just look at teaching children how to create, but also how to participate and interpret and take in.
I think they are key points. And so some of these changes are obviously, they need to be happening at the base level, the fundamental level of our very culture. I think it's Simone has a question up the back there.
Hi. Probably more a statement than a question, I think,
Sure.
at this stage. But I just think it's interesting today, throughout the entire discussion, we've heard mostly from, mid-career artists or established artists. And I think in some respects, maybe emerging artists have been overlooked a little bit in this discussion. And I think I just wanted to also say that I think as an emerging, as an emerging West Australian artist and also as an art industry professional, I work at the Fremantle Arts Centre, I actually think it's a really interesting and dynamic time to be working within the visual art scene in Perth. I think there's quite a lot of opportunities for young artists to show, and I think a lot of those have been facilitated by other young artists putting on kind of artist-run spaces and things like that. There's quite a few young artists here that I've seen today, or young curators who I think do an incredible job at facilitating the practice of themselves and also of their peers. And I think a recent experience I had in Sydney, I was actually quite surprised about how other states viewed the West Australian Perth art scene. A lot of them thought it was quite dynamic, and a number of people sort of told me, both within visual arts and music, that we sort of punch above our weight a little bit in that respect. And I just think there's a couple of things that have happened recently within the kind of, probably again, more artist-run spaces and artists doing it for themselves, which I think is part of contemporary art practice. But Paper Mountain recently had an art auction, which obviously their main audience was artists, so a lot of the works didn't really go beyond maybe $400. If it was a different audience, perhaps they would have. But a lot of work sold. It was a really wonderful way of advertising artists, but also of raising money for the artist-run space itself. And I think also there's a recent show or demonstration of young artists showing interstate with Tila George, who's doing some fantastic stuff at the moment, Shannon Lyons and Claire Peake, who recently had a show curated by Richard Lua in Eastern States. And I think also one of the artists that was talked about before about being represented in a West Australia, or one of the West Australian artists being represented in a national collection was Beck Beardmore, who's doing some really great stuff. So I kind of think it's not all doomsday. I feel like it's actually an interesting time to be showing here, and I think there's room for us to grow and move and develop, and I think that's exciting.
Thank you. I think simultaneously, I think that's been one of the points, that there are absolute positives, but we do need to also be looking at how we can push things further forward from where we are. I think our time is well and truly up, so thank you very much.